Now we are going to take a look at the IQR and outliers based off the 5-number summary. So we have our IQR and outliers based off the 5-number summary. Uh, so the idea of the IQR, basically we want a way to measure variability that's not just based off the first and last data value, or smallest and largest data value. So we want a way to measure variability or spread that is not based off just the smallest or largest number. The reason behind this, you may have thousands of data values, and the vast majority of those data values are all clumped very close together, but then just have a rare extreme data value that's really far on the low side or really far on the high side. If we use range and we're only paying attention to the smallest and the largest, we will then see this huge spread, not acknowledging the fact that most of the data is actually very close together. So finding the IQR, the IQR is what is called the interquartile range. And we are essentially looking at the range between our two quartiles, Q1 and Q3. So it's the range or distance between Q1 and Q3. So to find the IQR, we simply do Q3 minus Q1. That'll give us the distance between Q1 and Q3. In the terms of the box plots, this is literally the width of the box. In the box plot. The idea of an outlier, this is coming back to the fact that we may have most of our data clumped together and then just have some really strange values that are very far away from the rest of the data. So the idea of an outlier is we want to recognize strange or surprising data values. That are far from the rest of the data. Sorry, my daughter might be heard in the background. When we go to find the outliers, we're going to have sort of some key places to look at. So we're going to look at a box plot to start this off. So if we look at our box plot, I'm first just going to focus on the box. So in a box plot, so our Q1 to Q3 is our box. right? And this is going to be considered sort of our typical values, typical range. So our typical range goes from Q1 to Q3. Then we'll have what we expect to see. So the things we expect, we're going to give ourselves quite a bit of wiggle room on each side of our typical range. So our wiggle room the way we will do that is we will take our that stretch from Q1 to Q3, and now we're gonna, that distance is our IQR. And we are going to add that distance and then half of that distance again to both sides. So we're going to take that distance and then take another half of that again. So this is our IQR, and this is half of our IQR. And that will give us our boundary for what we expect. So if we do the same thing on the other side, we go out our IQR, we go out half our IQR. I did not give myself a lot of room on the left side here. Then anything here may not be what we consider typical, but it's still expected. Anything that goes beyond that is now what we would consider to be surprising or strange, and anything on any points, data values that fall out in that extreme area would be considered to be outliers. So anything on those extremes are considered outliers. So to see if there are any outliers, to check for outliers, we need to first find the IQR, assuming we already know the 5-number summary. Anything smaller than Q1 minus 1.5 copies of the IQR, or larger than Q3 plus 1.5 copies of the IQR, is an outlier. From here, let's go ahead and do an example. So we're going to look at that same information we were working with before. A study was run on the number of cups of coffee that college students drink each week. The 5-number summary was found to be the minimum equals 0, Q1 equals 5, mean equals 9, Q3 equals 15, and max equals 31. We want to know if there are any outliers. So we could look at our box plot. So again, we had 0, 5, 9, 15, and then we had quite a stretch to 31. At 0, the minimum, the smallest data value, is awfully close to our box. So I would be highly shocked if that were considered to be an outlier. That 31, on the other hand, is awfully far away from our box. So it's possible that that maximum value, that maximum of 31 is actually an outlier. So what we can do is we can simply figure out precisely what we're looking at. So our IQR is 15 minus 5, or 10. So to figure out if we have any outliers, we're going to go one copy of the IQR. So we're going to add on 10. And then we'll do another half. So if we add on 10 and half of 10, what we are really looking at, I'm going to move things around so I'm not so crowded. Sorry about that. So our IQR was 15 minus 5, Q3 minus Q1. The width of the box was 10. Here's our plus our IQR. And here's our plus half of our IQR. Again, our IQR in this case was 10. Well, if we add on 10, well, we get 25. So this would be at 25. And half of 10 is 5. So we'll land at 30. So our cutoff is at 30. If we did this same thing just with the calculations, we took our Q3 and added 1.5 times our IQR. Q3 was 15 plus 1.5 copies of 10. Keep in mind, we always do multiplication before addition, unless parentheses tell us otherwise. 1.5 times 10 is 15, so we are looking at 15 plus 15, and we get 30. That is indeed that same cutoff that we found just by adding those pieces of the IQR. So in this case, anything to the right is indeed an outlier. Which means at least that 31 is an outlier. So the maximum is past our cutoff. For expected values. And so that means that 31 is an outlier. Now, from the 5-number summary from the box plot, we have no idea what any of the other specific values are. We don't know if there were other individuals that were beyond that 30. But we do know, because the maximum is 31, that we have at least one individual that has more than 30 cups of coffee per week. If we were checking for outliers on the left, Just quickly, if we were checking for outliers on the left, here's our 0. Oops. Sorry, this was 0, 5, 9, 15. Right? Again, our IQR of 10. We would go down 1 IQR to the left, so we would minus 10. And then we go half an IQR to the left, we would minus half of 10. Well, it's just subtracting off the entire 10, not even 1.5 IQRs. We clearly go well beyond our minimum. But just for that, for the sake of going through, this would be at -5, and then going another 5 past would fall at -10. If we had done our calculations, we would have done our Q1 minus 1.5 copies of our IQR. Q1 was 5 minus 1.5 times 10. We would have been looking at 5 minus 15, which is indeed -10. And again, that gave us this number. So 2 different ways you can figure out those cutoffs for the outliers. But that's the basic gist for how to find if there are any outliers.